Feeling tired? Feeling old before your time? In the early 1900s, doctors had an answer. Drink radioactive water. This is not a joke, and it is not ancient history. This happened barely a century ago, in an era of cars, telephones, and modern hospitals. Educated people, wealthy people, even doctors themselves, paid good money to drink, bathe in, and inject a substance we now know caused cancer, believing with complete sincerity that it would heal them. This is the story of how a genuine scientific discovery turned into one of the strangest and most disturbing medical crazes in American history. In 1898, in a small laboratory in Paris, Marie and Pierre Curie announced the discovery of a new element. They named it radium. It glowed faintly in the dark. It gave off constant heat with no visible fuel source. To scientists of the era, it seemed to defy the basic laws of physics itself. The public was captivated. Newspapers described radium in almost magical terms, a substance that seemed to generate limitless energy from nothing at all. Nobody yet understood the danger. Radiation exposure symptoms could take months or years to appear, which meant, for a critical period, radium looked like nothing but a miracle. Marie Curie herself, tragically, would later die from complications linked to decades of radiation exposure. But that outcome was still far in the future. In the meantime, a simple but catastrophic idea took hold across America. If radium contained this much mysterious energy, surely it could transfer that energy to the human body. If a little radium made a rock glow with power, why couldn't a little radium make a tired, aging person glow with vitality too? It was, in hindsight, a complete misunderstanding of basic science. But at the time, it sounded thrillingly plausible. By the early 1900s, radium had become the hottest ingredient in American consumer products. And almost none of these products contained any meaningful safety testing. Radium toothpaste promised a brighter, healthier smile. Radium face cream promised to erase wrinkles by energizing tired skin cells. There was radium suppositories, radium chocolate bars, sold as an energy boost. Even radium-infused undergarments, marketed to men experiencing what was delicately called lost vitality. The logic behind every single product was identical. Radium was powerful. Power meant health. Therefore, radium meant health. Nobody stopped to ask an obvious question. What if that power was not gentle at all? What if it was simply destructive, regardless of the dose? Among all the radium products flooding the market, one would eventually become the most infamous of them all, a tonic water called Radithor. Radithor was created and sold by a man named William J. A. Bailey, who marketed himself using the impressive-sounding but entirely fake title of doctor. Bailey had no medical degree. He had previously been fired from a string of failed business ventures, including one selling a fraudulent aphrodisiac made mostly from horse blood extract. But Radithor would become his masterpiece of persuasion. Small glass bottles containing triple distilled water infused with actual radium isotopes, dissolved directly into the liquid. The marketing claims were extraordinary. Radithor was advertised as a cure for impotence, mental illness, and general fatigue. It was marketed as, quite literally, perpetual sunshine. Bailey sold the product with total, unwavering confidence. He personally drank it every single day and encouraged others to do the same, insisting it was completely safe. Radithor cost around $1 per bottle, which in the money of the 1920s was a genuinely significant expense, aimed specifically at wealthy customers who could afford daily doses. And it was here that Radithor found its most devoted, and ultimately its most tragic, customer. Eben Byers was a wealthy American socialite, a former college athletics champion, and a well-known figure in high society circles. In 1927, after injuring his arm, Byers' own physician recommended Radithor as a treatment to help speed his recovery. The doctor believed, in complete sincerity, that it would help. Byers found that after drinking Radithor, he felt more energetic. He felt, in his own words, remarkably good. So he continued drinking it. And then he continued drinking more of it. Byers would eventually consume approximately 3 bottles of Radithor every single day for nearly 3 years. That is over 1,000 bottles of radium-infused water, consumed by one single man, all while believing it was actively improving his health. At first, the effects seemed, to Byers, entirely positive. He felt energized. He credited Radithor with his continued vitality and enthusiasm for life. But radium behaves in the human body in a uniquely dangerous way. Chemically, it closely resembles calcium, which means the body mistakes it for calcium and stores it directly inside the bones. Once radium settles into bone tissue, it does not simply pass through the body and leave. It remains there, continuously emitting radiation for years, silently destroying the surrounding tissue from within. By 1930, Byers began to notice deeply alarming symptoms: severe headaches, significant, unexplained weight loss, a persistent, worsening pain in his jaw that would not go away. His doctors were, at first, deeply confused. What they eventually discovered was catastrophic. The radium had been silently eating away at the bones of his jaw and skull for years. Byers underwent multiple surgeries in a desperate attempt to remove the affected bone tissue. Doctors removed sections of his jaw. The disease, if it can even be called that, continued to progress regardless. By 1932, Eben Byers was in the final stages of radium poisoning. His jaw had almost entirely disintegrated. He had lost most of his teeth. Holes had formed in his skull. A federal investigator who visited him near the end of his life described his condition using a phrase that would later become infamous in American press coverage. He simply wrote that Byers' whole body was, in his words, undergoing a slow disintegration. Eben Byers died in March of 1932, at just 51 years old. When he was buried, his coffin had to be lined with lead, because his own remains were still measurably radioactive. His death became a national news story. The Wall Street Journal ran headlines that would become historically famous, simply stating that the radium water worked fine until his jaw came off. For the American public, Byers' very public, very wealthy, very tragic death was the moment radium tonics stopped seeming glamorous and started seeming genuinely, viscerally horrifying. But it is important to understand that Eben Byers was not simply the victim of one dishonest salesman. He was the product of an entire cultural moment. This era in America has often been called the Age of Snake Oil, a period when unregulated tonics, elixirs, and cure-alls were sold with almost no scientific oversight whatsoever. Before federal drug regulation existed in any meaningful form, absolutely anyone could bottle a substance, invent a compelling story about it, and sell it directly to a public desperate for miracle cures. Radium tonics succeeded specifically because they arrived wrapped in the language of legitimate science. Radioactivity was cutting edge. It was modern. It felt, to the average consumer, undeniably real and powerful. Salesmen like William Bailey exploited a very specific, very human vulnerability. People trust what feels scientific, even when they do not actually understand the science at all. It is worth remembering that Marie Curie herself never claimed radium was a safe household cure. The most dangerous misuse of her discovery happened entirely outside the world of legitimate laboratory science. The public tragedy of Eben Byers' death finally forced meaningful action. The Federal Trade Commission launched a formal investigation into Radithor and its manufacturer. Radithor was pulled from the market. William Bailey himself was never criminally prosecuted, largely because, at the time, there was still no clear federal law specifically banning radioactive tonics from being sold. Bailey continued selling other radioactive health products for the remainder of his life. He reportedly continued insisting, until his own death, that radium exposure had never harmed him personally. The Byers case became a pivotal moment in the history of American drug regulation. It contributed directly to the growing public and political pressure that would soon reshape the entire pharmaceutical industry. In 1938, just a few years after Byers' death, the United States passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, dramatically expanding the government's authority to regulate what could legally be sold as medicine. The radium water craze slowly faded from public consciousness. Bottles of Radithor became, decades later, unsettling historical curiosities, occasionally rediscovered in old basements, their radioactivity still faintly measurable. Today, historians and toxicologists sometimes locate original bottles of Radithor. When tested with modern equipment, many still register detectable levels of radioactivity, even after nearly a century. The story of radium water raises an uncomfortable question that extends well beyond the 1920s. How do we, as a society, decide what counts as legitimate science versus dangerous, unproven quackery? In every era, including our own, new discoveries arrive wrapped in language that sounds impressively scientific, long before their actual safety or effectiveness has been properly, rigorously established. The story of Eben Byers is not simply a strange historical curiosity. It is a warning about the very human tendency to mistake genuine excitement for genuine evidence. Radium was real. Its glow was real. Its energy was real. But its supposed healing power was, in the most tragic way imaginable, entirely imagined. And somewhere, in a quiet cemetery, lies a man whose body still carries, even now, the faint radioactive echo of a cure that was never a cure at all.